Hey, we're Matt and Julie Beamer with Jonathan and Elizabeth Beamer, and we are celebrating 30 years of living and ministering overseas. And to do that, we're going to be sharing stories both today, Club 1040 Day, and throughout the year coming. We'll be dropping different stories, different podcasts, and things like that to show you how your investment in Club 1040 is making an impact throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and to talk about how by the year 2030, we want to see that impact expand and continue in a strong and more quick way. So make sure you don't miss out, and also help us out by sharing these with your friends as well. Spread the word, because the more we get this word out, the more we can do, the more quickly we can do it together. God bless.
Okay, so you guys met in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You went to Bible school. You got married. Then what happened?
Well, we moved back to my home church in Michigan, and that was kind of the plan. It was like, okay, we're going to get married, we're going to go back, and we're going to help out with whatever they needed from a church standpoint. And we got jobs real quick. You got a job before I did.
Mm-hmm. I started doing hair, and I got to meet loads of people, and everybody knew Matt already, but I was able to really feel part of the community by working in this little salon that everybody went to. And then we literally were working a million hours at the church, doing everything from painting mailboxes, anything that we could do that could be able to assist the pastor. We just wanted to go back and lift up their arms. I started helping the pastor's wife with children and with women. We started cleaning the church. Matt started assisting and
did the youth ministry. Did mission trips.
Why did you choose to go that route?
First of all, I knew that as I came from that church, I knew that I was supposed to go back to that church. So even before we met, I knew that was the next step.
And he told me, get married and do this, or you're not for me. So I just obviously went. Yeah. I loved it. I was excited about it. I didn't have any direction, and you had that vision to go forward, and I just knew that that's what we were supposed to do.
Also, when you know what you're supposed to be doing in the future together, you've always said you find someone that you want to be like and go learn under them, right?
Yeah. I mean, at that particular time, it was more about kind of honoring the local church and honoring the fact that I'd come from that church and all that they had poured into me, and then it was going back and serving in some way. They'd helped a lot with helping me to get to Bible college. And it just was, we both knew and had an agreement, that's the next step.
But we knew that this isn't the final step in some ways, because even when we got when we were living in we had bought a kind of like a condo to live in, and we kept the smallest furniture. We didn't get into any debt. We kept it so tight. I mean, our first bed was like a twin mattress on the floor. I do not know how to this day we were able to sleep on that twin mattress.
I also don't know.
But we did, and we just kept things really tight. Other people had let us use their furniture. We just knew, don't get into debt because something's getting ready to happen. We didn't know how, we didn't know where, but all of a sudden he came home one day.
Yeah, so backing up to the point that you made about I used to draw houses during that period, and I could draw a house in about 12 to 15 hours. So sometimes I'd just stay up all night long drawing. And before we left the Bible college, because she worked at the ministry, we used like a credit card. We didn't have any money. So we used a credit card to buy she got a 70% discount on the ministry resources. We bought as many as we possibly could. And back then it's cassette tapes. And so I would draw a house for 15 hours, 12 hours, and I would be listening to teaching tapes the whole entire time. And I remember very clearly one time I was listening to a series on the anointing. And in that series, the teacher said, the person teaching said, if I was a young minister, I'd find somebody who was doing what I felt called to do, and I'd go and help them. And he was talking about there's a participation in an anointing when you do that. And you also practically learn the things that you can learn what not to do sometimes by, helping other people, and also learn things, to emulate. So that was something that really was strong in my heart. But the other thing is, as Julie said, we had bought a condo. It was a little 2-bedroom condo, and because we didn't know, kind of thought we might be there for some time, and so I had found a piece of property that we could afford. It was like $7,000 for like an acre and a half. It was a good place. And I had drawn our kind of dream starter house. And practically speaking, everything had aligned to where this was the perfect time. And so I'm doing some revisions on that. That's back before computers, so I'm actually using graphite and pencils and erasers and all that. And I remember just throwing the pencil down on my paper. I'm like, God, why do I feel like I'm wasting my time? And kind of the response that came up from my spirit is because you are. And my reply back is, but this is not. There's nothing that. This is not so important to my soul or to my life that I wouldn't be willing to just build it and sell it. And the way everything was lining up, I could have built it for like 60% of its value. I would have had probably about $50,000 at least in my pocket to go anywhere in the world. And at the time, $50,000 would have been like $500,000. I mean, it was massive. And I'm like, I'll build it, sell it, and go. And the Lord's like, you don't understand. You don't have time to build this house. And I'm like, I know it'd take us less than a year to build it. So where am I going to be in a year? I need to find out. And because, as Julie mentioned, we pretty much volunteered full time at the church. So I started going in extra early to the office, and I'd plant a chair in front of a big map that was on the wall of the sanctuary. The church was only about 150 people. And so in the sanctuary, they had this big world map, and they had a couple missionaries that, this is old time days with yarn to the country with the missionary picture. And but I put the chair in front of there, and I just spent time praying. And in that time of prayer, more and more, the Lord led me to one of the missionary couples that were based in England. This guy had a ministry where he would go into countries kind of before they opened up. The more remote, the more challenging they were, the more interested he was in that country. Places like Borneo and Burma and these different places. And in my mind, I kind of built it up to, he was almost like somewhere between Indiana Jones and Jesus. I mean, it was like, that's what I want to do with my life. And it was about that time I heard that thing about, go and help somebody who's doing what you feel called to do and help them. So I'm a like research guy. And so I went and found all the audio cassettes, master cassettes, where this guy had taught in the church ever. And I just started listening to him. On the last one, he said something that was like, it was a Q&A time that he did on a Sunday night in a small group of people. And they said, what's your greatest need? And he said, I need somebody that can do administrative things, but also understands the difference between cultures and this, kind of help me from the U.S. side, and I'm like, I can do that. That's what I'm doing right now. And that was back in the days before email. So I came home during lunchtime because Julie, many times, she would be able to come home for a long lunch. And so I'd always make sure I was there. And she's like, are you okay?
And he just broke down crying.
I'm like,
I think we're supposed to move to England.
yeah, I'm like, no, I don't think I'm okay. I think, in fact, we're supposed to move to England. She's always like,
Ready to go.
I was in the kitchen there, and she put her, I remember slumping down on the kitchen floor. We didn't have any furniture, so slumping down on the kitchen floor. And she got down on the kitchen floor next to me, put her arm around my shoulder, and she's like, okay, if that's what the Lord says, then that's what we'll do. And literally, the little bit that we had, I think we had
We had lots of wedding gifts that people had given us.
but I mean, he got rid of the ironing board like the next week or
next
something.
week,
I mean,
yeah.
literally anything that we did have, you got rid of immediately.
We started watching movies all about England, all the period, dramas and stuff, doing as much research as we could, but it could never prepare us for
Yeah, because
actually
he
going.
was based in England, but in Liverpool, but ministered in these countries from there.
I have a question. How did you know that so for me, example, one of the things that if I saw, I could build this thing and get this much return and have money, I would be like, that's something that could set us up. How did you differentiate, obviously, other than the leading of the Holy Spirit, to be like, we're not supposed to do this and we're supposed to go this way instead?
I mean, obviously, you can develop your spirit to where you become more and more sensitive, and at that point, I just had a confidence and a knowing that this wasn't about the money. In fact, timing was important, and that God would provide otherwise. In fact, actually, about a month before we moved overseas, maybe 2 months even, I came to your mom and I said, I think I'm supposed to stop drawing houses. And that was a big portion of our income.
It was very hard for me because I come from a very working class where if you're going to do something, you have to make the money to make it happen. And when he told me that, I literally got really scared, like, what's going on here? You know, how are we going to take this step of faith and do what God's called us to do? And you're not even working, you know? It was so contrary to my mind. It was probably the hardest step in going through that, is how do you actually come to do this?
Yeah. And I think the reason why I asked that is exactly that, because people don't really see how they can start something until everything's lined up perfectly.
It was
so
not
hearing
perfect,
that is, yeah.
It was a scary, for a wife, a newly married wife, you know, with a young husband, it was the hardest thing. I did not comprehend it, and God literally had to take me step by step to get me to do this.
Yeah, and the other side of that is when I had learned enough at Bible college. Thank goodness they taught us well when it came to the family side. But when she said, no, I'm not in agreement, I'm like, okay. So I just went to the Lord and I prayed. I'm like, Lord, if you really want me to do this, then you're going to have to talk to her. And like a week later, 2 weeks later, you came back and you said, you know what, that thing you said, okay, I'm in agreement. We can do that. And so I was getting paid maybe it seems like $140 a week, maybe at the church part-time by then. But I would make maybe,
You made
$1,500 a month.
We tithed more than what you were making.
About $1,500 with each house I drew. Yeah. So exactly. And
And you were doing everything, right? Cleaning the
We-
toilets.
well, by
and-
then, yeah.
And we were also painting on the weekend. We would do apartment painting. We would do other things that would
A
supplement
guy in the
as well.
church who, Kerry McMahon, who had, so one of the things I thought, because I had been building houses, when the drawing side of it finished for a little while, I started working for a guy building houses. And then that finished, and I'm like, I'm going to start a cleaning business. And one of the guys in the church had one, and I'm like, hey, can I just shadow you around? You don't have to pay me or anything. He's like, man, I'd love to pay you. Come and work for me. And he paid me way more than he should have. He was really generous. And so in the end, I ended up just working for him for a while. And then he also, what he would do is these big apartment complexes, when they turned over houses, he'd go in and paint the whole thing. So he and I could paint a 2-bedroom apartment in like 5 hours. Just whip it out. And then there's a couple of them where your mom and I went in and did that. And we did it in about 5-6 hours.
Yeah. And at the same time, we were starting to develop our partnership. We got our flashy picture taken with us as a couple, and we got letterhead, and it was so much fun. We started, building, telling people, painting the vision to other people about what we were going to do. And people believed in us. It was amazing to see how God just started bringing people in our lives.
Yeah, so I think I wrote it by hand too, which is embarrassing. But like a 3-page letter, sent it by fax to the guy who's based in England, and said, look, we just want to come over and pretty much volunteer full time as missionaries. We'll raise our own support. And then he's like, yes, come. I then went to the Lord. I'm like, Lord, one of my main responsibilities at the church was the youth ministry. And I'm like, there's things I've seen in my heart that I haven't seen in reality yet. I don't want to go from here until we see it. And the cool thing is, within 3 months, that youth group, which we started with like 3 kids when we first took it over, and it only grown to maybe like 10 kids over the space of a year. Within like 3-4 months, it grew to like 30 kids. And we had like this little mini revival happening in all the local schools that were attached to the church. All kinds of cool things, big things happening in town. And I was kind of like, Lord, am I supposed to go? I mean, this is amazing what's happening.
At the same time, we were taking mission trips. We were taking our church people into Colombia. We almost crashed in Venezuela. We saw people die on the side of the road.
Oh my gosh.
We left a kid in Mexico. I mean, we have so many stories about the mission trip. So we were really doing, what you would normally do if you had missions on your heart. But God was just challenging us to take this next step.
Leaving the kid in Mexico was a funny one. Because we drove all the way down from Michigan.
Yeah, maybe you should go into detail on that one.
All the way down to Mexico. We spent some time, and cool things happened during that trip. That was a youth trip. There was a mission couple that we went to support there. And one of the things that happened, if you remember the basketball court thing, we were doing an outreach to children in the basketball court, and this gang comes over with this guy carrying a rifle. And there's like probably 12, 13, mostly guys, but a couple girls in there. and the biggest guy had a rifle. So I was kind of doing the message to the kids, and I handed it off to you or someone else, and then I went over to this gang of youth, and I just started talking to them. And so as I'm talking to them, there's a girl's voice in English. It's in Spanish, so it's being translated. So a girl's voice in English says, "I know what you're saying is true." And I'm like, that was weird. Where did that come from? Who said that? And I keyed in on her, and she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" She says, "Well, a few months ago, I got hit by a car and I died." And she's like, and had this experience, and you know, I kind of saw God. And she's like she's like a teenager talking about this. And I'm like, "You need to tell your friends that." She's like, "I can never tell my friends that. They would totally like just make fun of me." And I'm like, "No, you need to tell them that." So I'm like, I told her, "Hey, everybody gather around. She's going to tell you a story," and put her on the spot.
So wrong.
And she told it, did the whole thing in Spanish. And then afterwards, I went to the Bible. And I'm like, look, the same Bible that talks about heaven also talks about hell. And I talked about visions, and I talked about Paul, you know, all these things I showed him from the Bible. And I'm like, this is real. And your friend has experienced this. And I had also proved it out ahead of time. I was like, is anybody, before I asked her to share, did anybody know that she got hit by a car? It's like, yeah. Someone said, yeah, she almost died. And, you know, she did die. She came back to life. So, so then I, because we were kind of all squat down listening to her, and got them all gathered around. So I stood up, and I took a couple steps back, and they all stood up. And I said, if you want to receive Jesus, which means this, you know, you're turning your back on your lifestyle. You're going to take, you know, basically give your entire life, make Jesus your Lord. I went through the whole thing, and I'm like, take a step forward, and nobody moved. And then the guy with the rifle takes a step, and then he turned to the guys on his left, on his right, and he's like that, and you know, like nods his head that way, like take a step, guys, and they all step forward. And then he turns the other way, and he says the same thing. They all step forward. So like all of them took a step forward, and I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, maybe they didn't understand me. So I went through the whole thing again just to make sure. And I'm like, now if you really, really mean it, take a step forward. And the same thing happened. The guy took a step forward. And so later, a few years later, I met the missionary from there. And he's that group, that gang was called Los Hermanos, the brothers. And he's like, after that, the glue that held them together was gone, and that whole gang disbanded. And then like maybe 10 years later, he's like, you know what? A number of those guys became pastors. Isn't that cool?
Awesome.
So it was on that trip though. It was on the border of Nogales, Mexico, and the U.S. And there's Nogales, Arizona, and there's Nogales, Mexico. And there was gun runners going back and forth and different things, and we had some situations with that. But so the last day, because the rental car company did not allow us to drive our 15-passenger vans into Mexico, we left them on the U.S. side, and then we got the missionary to come over and pick us up. So we all did kind of a little bit of a shopping day, and this little guy named Mark, he's the smallest little guy, he kept tagging, he's like always the last guy out of every shop. And like, come on, Mark, keep up. So then I told Julie, I was like, I'm going to go across the border, and I'm going to get the vans. There's a McDonald's. You guys walk across the border to the McDonald's. We'll meet you at the McDonald's, and then we'll regroup there. So we get to McDonald's. We're sat there. Everybody's eating. And then someone says, this is like an hour after we were at McDonald's. And someone's like, hey, where's Mark? And another kid goes, yeah, where is Mark? And another kid goes, cool, we left Mark in Mexico.
That should be your next children's book right there. We left Mark in Mexico.
His mom was the most harshest mom back at church. I mean, so
she was quite the prophet.
Strong, yeah.
Yeah.
Did not want to leave him
Mark.
behind. Yeah.
Yeah. So it turned out that Mark somehow remembered he talked to a guy that understood English enough, a shopkeeper. I mean, he could have been like human trafficked right then. I mean, he was, but yeah, some shopkeeper, he somehow remembered how to get himself, and I don't know if I could have done that, back to where we were staying with the missionaries, and the guy had him there. And back then there's no cell phones or anything. Mm-hmm. So the only thing I knew, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to drive back into Mexico, or go back into Mexico and try and get to the missionary, figure out where they're at. and then see. And Mark just sat there eating tacos or something when I get there. He's like, hey. I'm like, oh my God.
That was one of our many adventures, but that youth group, truly had, they loved the Lord so much. It was wonderful to see what God was doing before we were able to take that step
Yeah, there
into
was
Liverpool.
a real powerful move of God at that time. And so anyway, we obviously went back and prayed about it. Yes, we're supposed to do it. And we took that step to go to move to Liverpool. But the thing is right before we moved, we didn't have any of the money. I remember it must have been 2 weeks before we were due to leave. And I kept, every week back then as travel agents, every week I would call the travel agent and say, like, just hold our tickets. We'll get the money to you. Hold the tickets. And so 2 weeks beforehand, I call and I'm like, hold our tickets. And they're like, you don't have any tickets. And I'm like, what do you mean we don't have any tickets? And they're like, your name's not in here. And so I just went away went home and I'm like, God, it doesn't seem like anything's working out. Our house hasn't sold. We don't have the money for the tickets anyway, even if they were still there. We don't have the money to go overseas, all this stuff. I'm like, are we supposed to even go? Maybe it's just personal ambition. I was trying to process all that. And I'm like, I'm going to just get on my knees and pray in the Spirit until I know that I know that I know. So I did that. I'm praying in the Spirit. And then after about maybe an hour, I start hearing myself say these words out loud in English. I'm like, I just want to walk on water, Lord. No matter what it takes, I want to walk on water. And I saw myself walking on water across the ocean. I'm like, it doesn't matter. If I have to, put Julie and suitcases on my back and swim across, we're going. I know that we're supposed to go. Mm-hmm. But that means you're going to have to come up with the resources and stuff. And so that night in church, I'm getting ready ahead of time. I'm calling the travel agent, trying to figure things out. I'm in the office and I can hear real thin walls to the pastor's office, and I can hear him start laughing, like really loud. And I'm like, we're going to have a good service tonight. So come back to that evening in the service, and a lady that had actually been really upset at me in the church, and she usually was used in some kind of like gifts of the Spirit in church, but she hadn't been for a while. She gave a kind of a tongue and interpretation of prophecy in church. And it was about someone walking on water. And then the pastor stood up and he's like, while I was praying, I saw Matt walking on water with like suitcases, pulling the suitcases behind him. And then I got up and told everybody what had happened earlier that day. So it was things like that literally it felt like we were walking on water.
God just kept on giving us words that we could hold on to take us further and further.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us, hearing some of the stories, and letting us pull back the curtain a little bit and invite you into our family adventures over these last 30 years. It's because of you that Clifton 40 has been able to do anything that we've done. Thank you so much.